Ambassador Catherall had spent 3 long years watching the humans. He sat in his dark office on the Velith homeworld, surrounded by screens that showed him everything his spy satellites had recorded. Every day, he watched. Every night, he wrote reports. And every report said the same thing. The humans were completely and utterly insane. Catherall was a Velith, a species known throughout the galaxy for their careful thinking and logical minds. His people had 4 eyes that could see in every direction. They had scales that changed color with their emotions. They lived for 300 years and never made decisions without thinking them through at least twice. Humans lived for maybe 80 years if they were lucky. They made decisions in seconds. And those decisions made no sense at all. Catherall pulled up his favorite recording. It showed a human female running into a burning building. The building was about to collapse. Everyone could see it was about to collapse. But this human ran inside anyway. Why? Because she heard a small animal crying. She nearly died to save a creature that was not even her own species. A creature she had never met before. She called the animal a cat, and she called herself its mom. Now, Catherall clicked his mandibles in confusion. This was normal behavior for humans. They formed bonds with anything. They kept wolves in their homes and called them good boys. They grew attached to robots and gave them names. One human had become famous for refusing to leave a sinking ship because his pet fish was still on board. But the violence was worse than the bonding. Catherall switched to another recording. This one showed humans engaged in something called football. They wore armor and threw themselves at each other with full force. Bones broke. Blood flowed. And when it was over, they hugged and called each other brothers. Another recording showed humans eating peppers that caused them physical pain. They cried and sweated and said things like, "Wow, that's a good one," while their bodies suffered. They did this for fun. Another showed humans jumping out of perfectly good aircraft with nothing but a piece of fabric to stop them from dying. They screamed with joy as they fell toward the ground. Catherall had shown these recordings to the High Council many times. Each time, the council members watched with their scales turning pale with fear. Each time, they agreed with his recommendation. Stay away from the humans. Do not engage. Do not invite them to join the galactic community. Just watch them from far away and hope they never notice us. This policy worked well for 12 years. Then, the Kravik Empire started expanding. The Kravik were insects. Big ones. They stood 8 feet tall and had natural armor covering their entire bodies. They had claws that could cut through steel and mandibles that could bite through bone. But worse than their bodies was their hunger. The Kravik wanted everything. Every planet. Every resource. Every slave they could capture. They had already taken 6 systems. The Velith border colonies were next. The High Council called an emergency meeting. Catherall stood before them, his scales shifting through shades of worry. "We need allies," the council leader said. Her name was Vethmora, and she was the oldest and wisest of their kind. "The Kravik are too strong for us alone." "The Goroth have refused," another council member reported. "They say they will not fight someone else's war." "The Fenari have fled to the Outer Rim." "The Kassith are negotiating surrender." Vethmora turned her 4 eyes to Catherall. "What about the humans?" Catherall felt his scales turn white. "The humans are dangerous and unpredictable. I have spent years documenting their behavior. They are not stable enough for alliance. Are they strong? Their individual strength is average. But they do not fight as individuals." Catherall pulled up another recording. It showed a human battle from their own history. Soldiers running toward enemy fire. Men throwing themselves on explosives to save their friends. Medics dragging wounded soldiers through mud and blood, refusing to leave anyone behind. They fight as if their own lives do not matter. They fight as if death is not the worst thing that can happen to them. What is the worst thing, in their view? Abandoning each other. Kethral's voice was quiet. Leaving someone behind. Failing to protect those they consider family. The council was silent for a long moment. "We need soldiers who are not afraid to die," Vethmara said finally. "You have just described such soldiers. They are chaotic. They make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They could turn on us. They could destroy everything. Or they could save us." Kethral wanted to argue more. He had 100 more recordings he could show them. Humans setting themselves on fire as protest. Humans climbing mountains because the mountains were there. Humans falling in love with aliens in their fiction and asking if such things could be real. But he could see that Vethmara had already decided. "You will go to them," she said. "You will live among them. You will study them not from a distance, but from within. And you will report back on whether they can be trusted. And if they cannot, then we will know we are doomed either way." Kethral left the council chamber with his scales stuck in a shade of gray that meant acceptance of fate. He was going to live with humans. He was going to serve on one of their ships. He was probably going to die in some stupid, pointless way that would make a great recording for whoever studied humans after him. He spent the next week preparing. He learned their language, though his translator would handle most of the work. He studied their customs. He memorized their strange social rules about eye contact and personal space, and something called small talk that seemed to serve no purpose except to fill silence. On the day he was scheduled to leave, he stood at the transport dock and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, a human ship was waiting for him. A ship full of creatures who ate poison for fun and threw themselves into danger without thinking. His scales shifted to a deep blue. Fear dawned, but beneath the fear, there was something else. Something he had not expected. Curiosity. He had watched humans for 3 years. He had studied their madness from a safe distance, but he had never spoken to one. He had never looked into their strange, two-eyed faces and tried to understand what drove them. Maybe they were just insane, or maybe there was something else. Something his recordings could not capture. Something that made millions of these short-lived, soft-bodied creatures believe they could stand against anything the universe threw at them. Kethral stepped onto the transport. He was about to find out. The human ship was smaller than Kethral expected. It was called the Starling, and it looked like someone had built it in a hurry and then forgotten to make it pretty. The hull was covered in patches where repairs had been made. The paint was faded. One of the sensor arrays was held in place with what appeared to be metal wire and hope, but the humans loved it. Kethral could see that as soon as he stepped through the airlock. A young human was polishing a panel on the wall, even though the panel was clearly old and worn beyond any help. Another was talking to the ship's computer as if it were a friend. "She's not much to look at," said a voice behind him, "but she's got it where it counts." Kethral turned and saw the captain for the first time. Danny Reeves was not impressive. He was average height for a human, with hair the color of sand and a nose that bent slightly to one side. His uniform was clean but not crisp. His smile was crooked. He looked like someone who had been in too many fights and enjoyed most of them. "Ambassador Kethral?" Danny extended his hand. Kethral had studied this gesture. He reached out and let the human grip his scaled appendage. Danny's hand was warm, almost hot. The grip was firm, but not painful. Up and down, and then it was over. "I am honored to serve aboard your vessel," Kethral said. His translator turned his clicks and whistles into English. "Honored?" Danny laughed. It was a strange sound, loud and sudden. "Nah, you got stuck with the boring assignment. We're just running escort on a supply convoy. Nothing exciting happens on the Starling." A woman appeared beside Danny. She was shorter than him, with dark hair pulled back tight and grease stains on her fingers. Her name tag said Torres. "That's a lie," she said. "Last time you said that we got boarded by pirates." "That was one time, Maggie." "It was 3 times, Danny. 3 times in 2 years. The third one barely counts. They ran away before we even fired." Maggie Torres looked at Cathral. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and they seemed to be measuring him. "Welcome aboard, Ambassador. I'm the chief engineer. If anything breaks, you come find me. If Danny breaks something, you come find me. If Danny gets us into trouble and something breaks because of it, you definitely come find me." "Hey," Danny protested. "I am sure the captain is very competent," Cathral said carefully. Both humans laughed at that. Cathral did not understand why. The tour of the ship took 2 hours. Danny walked him through every corridor, every room, every storage closet. He introduced Cathral to every crew member they passed. 47 humans, all of them strange in their own ways. There was Corey Webb, who handled communications. He was barely an adult by human standards, with a face full of spots they called freckles, and a smile that never seemed to fade. He shook Cathral's hand with too much enthusiasm and said he had always wanted to meet an alien. There was Paula Chun, who served as the ship's doctor. She was small and quiet, with gentle hands and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She asked Cathral about his biology, his diet, his sleep patterns. She wanted to make sure she could help him if he got hurt. "Do you expect me to get hurt?" Cathral asked. Paula and Danny exchanged a look. "We hope not," Paula said. "But hope is not a plan." There was the navigation officer, a large man named Eddie Vance, who hummed songs while he worked. There was the weapons specialist, a woman named Rita Santos, who had scars on her arms and never spoke about how she got them. There was the cook, an old man named Pete Morris, who insisted that Cathral try something called mac and cheese, and seemed personally offended when Cathral said he could not eat dairy. They were all so different from each other. Different sizes, different colors, different personalities. They argued and joked and insulted each other in ways that seemed cruel, but were apparently meant as affection. They called each other names that would start wars between Velith clans, and yet they were clearly a family. Cathral saw it in the way they moved around each other, always aware of where everyone else was. He saw it in the way they covered for each other's weaknesses without being asked. He saw it in the way Danny checked on every single crew member during the tour, asking about their health, their mood, their families back home. "You care about them," Cathral said when they were alone in the observation deck. Danny looked surprised by the question. "Of course I do. They're my crew. But they are not your blood family. They are not your species mates. Some of them you have only known for a few months." "Doesn't matter." Danny leaned against the window, looking out at the stars. "When you serve together, when you bleed together, when you trust someone to watch your back in a fight, that makes you family. Blood's got nothing to do with it." Cathral's scales shifted to a pale yellow. Confusion. "This is very different from how my people think. Yeah, I've read the reports on Velith culture. You guys are logical, careful. You only trust people you've known for decades." Danny turned to face him. "Nothing wrong with that. But humans, we don't live long enough for that kind of caution. We've got maybe 80 years if we're lucky. We can't wait decades to decide if someone's worth trusting. So you trust quickly and often get betrayed. Sometimes." Danny shrugged. "But sometimes you trust quickly and you find someone who'd die for you. Someone who makes your short life mean something. That's worth the risk." Cathral did not know what to say to that. His people lived for 300 years. They had time to be careful. They had time to think through every decision. But watching Danny Reeves lean against that window, watching him smile at the stars like they were old friends, Cathral wondered if maybe his people were missing. Something. Maybe a short life lived. Fully was worth more than a long life lived carefully. Or maybe he had just been on this ship too long, and the humans were already making him crazy. The convoy departed the next morning. 12 cargo ships carrying food and medicine to the border colonies. The Starling flew escort, circling the convoy like a protective bird watching over its nest. For 3 days, nothing happened. Catherall wrote his reports. He documented human behavior. He noted how they sang songs while they worked, how they told jokes during tense moments, how they seemed to find happiness in the smallest things. He was starting to think maybe this assignment would be boring after all. Then the convoy reached Station Coveth 9, and everything changed. Station Coveth 9 was the ugliest place Catherall had ever seen. It was built from the corpses of old ships, welded together over hundreds of years, until it became a massive metal tumor floating in space. The corridors were cramped and smelled of 1,000 different species. The lights flickered. The air recyclers wheezed, but it was neutral territory, which meant it was safe. At least, that was the theory. Danny insisted the crew needed shore leave. They had been flying for 2 weeks straight, and humans apparently needed to do something called blowing off steam, or they became irritable and dangerous. Catherall did not fully understand this, but he agreed to accompany a group to the station. "You'll love it," Corey Webb promised. "Coveth 9 has the best bars in the sector." "I do not drink alcohol," Catherall said. "They have other stuff. Weird alien drinks. Glowing things. Fizzy things. Things that taste like colors." Corey's eyes were bright with excitement. "Come on, Ambassador. Live a little." Catherall did not point out that living a little seemed to be how humans ended up dead. He simply followed them off the ship and into the chaos of the station. The bar was called the Rusty Airlock. The name was written in 6 different languages above the door, and none of the translations matched. Inside, it was dark and loud and filled with beings from every corner of the galaxy. Catherall saw Velith traders in one corner, their scales shifting nervously as they watched the crowd. He saw Gorath miners at the bar, their massive bodies hunched over drinks that would kill a human in seconds. He saw small furry Fenari scurrying between tables, selling things that were probably illegal. And in the far corner, he saw Kravik soldiers. There were 6 of them. They wore military uniforms and sat in a circle, their compound eyes scanning the room with cold interest. They were big, even for Kravik. Their natural armor gleamed under the dim lights. Their claws tapped against the table in a rhythm that sounded like a threat. "Ignore them," Danny said quietly. He guided the group to a table on the opposite side of the room. "We're not here to start anything." "Are they here to start something?" Catherall asked. "Probably not. Coveth 9 is neutral ground. Fighting here is bad for business, and the station owners don't care about politics. They care about money." Danny slid into a seat and waved to a server. "The Kravik know that. They won't risk getting banned from the best trading post in the sector." The server was a Gorath female, young and small by her species standards. She had soft brown fur and nervous eyes. She took their orders quickly and hurried away. Catherall found himself watching the Kravik. He had seen recordings of their attacks on Velith colonies. He had read the reports of what they did to prisoners. They were not just conquerors. They were cruel in ways that served no purpose except to cause fear. "Hey," Danny nudged him. "Stop staring. You'll attract attention." "I apologize. I have never seen Kravik in person before. They're not worth looking at. Trust me." Danny raised his glass. "Tonight, we're not soldiers. We're just people having a drink. Relax, Ambassador. Enjoy yourself." Catherall tried. He really did. He sipped a drink Danny had ordered for him, which was sweet and fizzy and did not burn like human alcohol. He listened to the crew tell stories. He watched Corey try to flirt with a Finari female who was clearly not interested. He even laughed once, though he was not entirely sure why. For a little while, he almost forgot about the Kravik. Then the young Gorath server made her way across the room, carrying a tray of drinks to another table. Her path took her past the Kravik corner. One of the soldiers stood up. He was the largest of the group, with scars across his armor that showed he had seen many battles. He stepped directly into the server's path, blocking her way. He said something in the Kravik language, clicking and hissing in a way that made the translator struggle. The server tried to go around him. He grabbed her arm. Kethril saw her face twist in pain. The Kravik's claws were digging into her fur, drawing blood. She made a small sound, something between a whimper and a plea. The bar went quiet. Everyone saw what was happening. Everyone looked away, except the humans. "Oh no," Maggie Torres said softly. Kethril turned to see Corey Webb standing up from his chair. The young man's face had changed. The bright smile was gone. In its place was something cold and hard. "Let her go," Corey said. His voice was not loud, but it carried across the silent room. The Kravik soldier turned his massive head to look at this small creature who dared to speak. "Human," the Kravik said. The translator made the words sound like an insult. "This does not concern you. You're hurting her." "So yeah, it does." Kethril felt his scales turn white. This was insane. Corey was maybe half the Kravik's size. He had no armor, no weapons, no natural defenses. He was soft and breakable and completely outmatched. And he did not seem to care. The Kravik released the Gorath server. She scrambled away, clutching her bleeding arm. The soldier turned to face Corey fully, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "You wish to fight? One soft little human against a Kravik warrior?" Corey smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had made a decision and was at peace with whatever came next. "Who said I was alone?" Kethril heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. He turned to see Danny Reeves rising to his feet, his face calm and almost happy. Maggie Torres was already moving, cracking her knuckles. Paula Chun was rolling up her sleeves. Eddie Vance, Rita Santos, Pete Morris, they were all standing. 8 humans against 6 Kravik soldiers. The math did not make sense. The Kravik are bigger, stronger, and covered in natural armor. They had claws that could cut through steel. They had mandibles that could crush bone. But the humans did not look worried. They looked eager. "Last chance," Danny said pleasantly. "Walk away, and we forget this happened. Stay, and we're going to have a problem." The lead Kravik made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You threaten us? You soft, weak, short-lived creatures? We will break you like twigs." Danny picked up his drink and finished it in one swallow. Then he set the glass down carefully, almost gently. "Yeah," he said. "That's what everyone thinks at first." The Kravik lunged out and chaos exploded. The first thing Kethril noticed was how fast Danny moved. One moment, the captain was standing still with that calm smile on his face. The next, he had grabbed his chair and thrown it across the room. The chair hit the lead Kravik in the chest, staggering the massive insect backward. Before the soldier could recover, Danny was already moving, closing the distance between them. Kethril had studied human combat in his recordings. He had watched their wars, their sports, their training exercises. But watching recordings was nothing like seeing it happen 3 feet away. Danny ducked under a claw swipe. That would have taken his head off. He came up inside the Kravik's guard and drove his fist into the soft spot beneath the soldier's armored chin. The Kravik's head snapped back. Danny grabbed one of the insect's antennae and pulled hard, twisting the soldier off balance. The Kravik screamed. It was a horrible sound, high and chittering. He swung wildly, catching Danny in the ribs. Kethril heard something crack. Danny grunted in pain but did not stop. He headbutted the Kravik directly in the face, shattering one of the soldier's compound eyes. Across the room, Maggie Torres had jumped onto the bar. She ran along its length and launched herself at another Kravik, driving both feet into his knee joint. The armor there was thinner, designed for flexibility. Her boots hit with the full force of her body behind them. The joint bent the wrong way. The Kravik went down with a shriek, clutching his ruined leg. Maggie rolled clear of his flailing claws and came up with a bottle in her hand. She smashed it against the edge of a table, creating a jagged weapon, and turned to face the next enemy. Corey Webb was fighting the third Kravik with nothing but his fists and his fury. The young man was fast, dodging claws and mandibles with movements that seemed almost like dancing. He could not hurt the armored parts of the soldier's body, so he did not try. Instead, he targeted the eyes, the joints, the soft tissue around the mouth. The Kravik caught him with a backhand blow that sent him flying into a table. Wood splintered. Corey hit the ground hard, blood running from his nose. For a moment, Kethril thought he was finished. Then Corey laughed. He actually laughed, spitting blood onto the floor and got back up. "That all you got?" he said. The Kravik hesitated. In that moment of confusion, Eddie Vance came up behind the soldier and brought a metal tray down on the back of his head. The impact rang through the bar like a bell. The Kravik stumbled forward, directly into Corey's waiting fist. Paula Chun was not fighting like the others. She moved through the chaos with a strange calm, her small hands finding pressure points and nerve clusters with medical precision. Kethril watched her grab a Kravik's arm and twist it in a way that made no sense until he heard the pop of the joint, dislocating. The soldier screamed and dropped to his knees. Paula stepped back, already looking for her next target. Rita Santos fought in silence. No battle cries, no taunts, no wasted energy. She had found a metal pipe somewhere, and she used it like an extension of her body. Every swing was calculated. Every strike landed exactly where she wanted it to land. The scars on her arms made sudden sense. This woman had been fighting her whole life. Even old Pete Morris was in the brawl. The cook had grabbed a heavy pan from behind the bar and was swinging it at any Kravik who came near him. His form was terrible, but his enthusiasm was impressive. "Come on, then," he shouted. "I've been tenderizing meat for 40 years. Kethril pressed himself against the wall, his four eyes trying to track everything at once. His scales had gone completely white with fear. He had never seen anything like this. The Kravik were stronger. That was obvious. Every blow they landed sent a human flying. Kethril saw bones break, blood flow. Bodies hit walls and floors with sickening thuds. But the humans kept getting up. Danny took a claw across his back that opened 3 deep gashes. He spun around and drove his elbow into the Kravik's throat. Corey's wrist was bent at a wrong angle, clearly broken, but he kept fighting with his other hand. Maggie was limping badly, but she refused to stop moving. They were not winning through strength. They were winning through something else. Something Kethril did not have a word for. They refused to quit. Every time they got knocked down, they got back up. Every time they got hurt, they got angry instead of afraid. They fought as a unit, covering each other, pulling injured friends out of danger while others pressed forward, and they were smiling. Kethril saw Danny Reeves grinning through a mask of blood, actually enjoying himself. He saw Corey Webb laughing as he dodged another blow. He saw Rita Santos allow herself a small, satisfied smile as her pipe connected with a Kravik's skull. The tide was turning. The Kravik had expected to crush these soft creatures in seconds. They had expected fear and surrender. Instead, they found themselves facing something they did not understand. Humans were supposed to be weak. Humans were supposed to run from pain. Humans were supposed to value their short lives too, much to risk them in pointless fights. But these humans did not care about any of that. They cared about the young Gorath server who was hiding behind the bar, trembling and crying. They cared about each other. They cared about something beyond themselves, and that made them terrifying. The lead Kravik, ichor leaking from his shattered eye and his broken mandible, made a sound Cathrall had never heard from their species. It was high and desperate, and full of something that took him a moment to recognize. Fear. Enough! The Kravik screeched. He stumbled backward, crashing into his remaining soldiers. Retreat! Retreat! The Kravik ran. 6 warriors, each one capable of killing a dozen Veleth, fled from 8 battered and bleeding humans. They pushed through the crowd and disappeared through the door, leaving a trail of ichor behind them. The bar was silent. Danny Reeves looked around at the destruction. Broken furniture, spilled drinks, blood and ichor mixing on the floor. He found his overturned glass, discovered it still had some liquid in it, and took a drink. Anyone hurt bad? He asked casually. Corey's got a broken wrist, Maggie reported. She was leaning against the bar, holding her injured leg. Paula's already looking at it. I'm fine, Corey protested. His face was pale and sweaty, but his eyes were bright. Did you see me? I punched that guy right in the face. You did good, kid. Danny clapped him on the shoulder. Stupid, but good. Paula Chun was already working on Corey's wrist, her gentle hands moving with practiced skill. This is going to need proper treatment on the ship. Hold still. Yes, ma'am. Cathrall found his voice. It came out as a whisper. Why? Danny turned to look at him. The captain's face was a mess, blood running from a cut above his eye and his lips split open. But his eyes were calm and clear. Why what? Why did you fight? You could have been killed. She was not your crew. She was not your species. She was a stranger. Danny looked at the Gorath server, who was being helped to her feet by Pete Morris. She was still crying, but she was alive and mostly unhurt. She looked at Danny with huge, grateful eyes. She needed help, Danny said simply. That's all that matters. Cathrall stared at him. In that moment, he felt something shift inside himself. Something fundamental change. For 3 years, he had watched humans and called them insane. Now he understood. They were not insane. They were something else entirely, and he needed to tell the High Council everything. 6 months later, Cathrall stood before the High Council once more. The chamber looked the same as it always had. The curved walls glowed with soft blue light. The council members sat in their elevated seats, their 4 eyes fixed on him, their scales shifting with curiosity and concern. Everything was familiar, but Cathrall was different. He had spent half a year living with humans. He had served on the Starling through 3 more combat missions, 2 emergency rescues, and one very memorable birthday party for Pete Morris that somehow involved fire and something called tequila. He had watched humans laugh and cry and fight and love. He had learned things that could never fit in a report, but he had to try. My previous assessment was incomplete, he began. His voice was steady, though his scales flickered with emotion. I told you that humans were chaotic and unpredictable. I was right, but I was also wrong about what that meant. The council leader, Vethmara, leaned forward. Explain. I believed human chaos was a weakness, a flaw in their design. I thought their short lives made them careless with those lives. Cathrall paused, gathering his thoughts. But I have learned that the opposite is true. Their short lives make every moment precious. They love quickly because they do not have time to wait. They form bonds easily because they cannot afford to be alone. And they fight fiercely because they know they have everything to lose. He pulled up a recording on the chamber's display. It showed the bar fight on Kovath 9, captured by the station's security cameras. The council watched in silence as 8 humans threw themselves at 6 Kravic warriors. "This is what I witnessed," Kethrall said. A young human named Corey Webb, barely more than a child by their standards, stood up to defend a stranger. He did not stop to calculate the odds. He did not think about his own safety. He saw someone in pain, and he acted. The recording showed Corey being struck, hitting the ground, and getting back up. It showed him laughing through the blood and fear. When I asked them why they fought, their captain said something I will never forget. Kethrall's scales shifted to a deep purple, the color of profound emotion. He said she needed help. That was all that mattered. Vethmara's scales rippled with something that might have been doubt. One act of courage does not define a species. No, but I have seen 1,000 such acts since then. Kethrall changed the display. New images appeared. A human engineer working for 30 hours straight to repair life support on a damaged station, refusing to sleep until everyone was safe. A human doctor giving blood to a Finari child, even though the process left her weak for days. A human soldier carrying a wounded Velith 3 miles through enemy territory, knowing every step could be his last. Humans do not just fight for their own kind, Kethrall said. They fight for anyone they consider worthy of protection. And they will consider anyone worthy, given the smallest reason to do so. This could make them dangerous allies, another council member said. If they bond so easily, they could bond with our enemies just as quickly. No, Kethrall shook his head firmly. That is not how it works. Humans are loyal to those who earn their loyalty, and they remember those who betray them. He thought of Danny Reeves, thought of the cold anger in the captain's eyes when he spoke about the Kravic raids on human colonies. Once you are their enemy, you stay their enemy. But once you are their friend, they will die for you. The chamber was quiet. Kethrall could see the council members exchanging glances, their scales shifting through colors of uncertainty and debate. "What is your recommendation?" Vethmara asked. "Full alliance." The words came out without hesitation. Not despite human nature, but because of it. The Kravic Empire expands because species flee before them. The Gorith will not fight. The Finari have run. The Kassith have surrendered. He stood straighter, his scales shifting to a bold orange, the color of conviction. Humans will not flee. They will not surrender. They will plant their feet and fight until the enemy breaks, or they do. And in my observation, it is usually the enemy who breaks first. Vethmara studied him for a long moment. "You have changed, Ambassador." "Yes," Kethrall did not deny it. "Living with humans changes you. They make you believe that impossible things are possible. They make you want to be better than you are. They make you willing to take risks you would never have considered before. Is that a good thing?" Kethrall thought about Danny Reeves, bleeding and smiling after the bar fight. He thought about Corey Webb, standing up against impossible odds because someone needed help. He thought about Maggie Torres and Paula Chun and all the others who had welcomed him into their family without hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I believe it is." The council voted that night. The decision was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Velith Collective would seek full alliance with humanity. 6 months after that, the Kravic Empire launched their assault. They came with a fleet of 300 warships, expecting to crush the Velith homeworld in a single strike. They had done it before to a dozen other species. They knew how to break a civilization, but when they arrived, they found human ships waiting for them. The Starling was there, patched and battered and beautiful. So were 100 other human vessels, from massive battleships to tiny fighters. They had crossed half the galaxy in response to the distress call. They had come not for money or territory or political advantage. They had come because their friends needed help. The battle lasted 3 days. It was brutal and bloody and costly. Many ships were lost on both sides. Many lives ended in the cold darkness of space. But on the third day, the Krovic fleet broke. They retreated, scattered, fled back to their empire to lick their wounds. They had never faced an enemy who refused to surrender. They had never seen warriors who smiled while they were dying. They did not understand it, and what they did not understand, they feared. Danny Reeves stood on the bridge of the Starling, blood on his uniform and exhaustion in his bones. Around him, his crew was cheering. They had won. Against all odds, they had won. "Captain," his communications officer said. "Incoming message from Ambassador Kethral on the Velis flagship. Put him through." Kethral's face appeared on the screen. His scales were cycling through every color of joy and relief and gratitude. Behind him, Kethral could see Velith officers embracing each other, some of them weeping. "Captain Reeves," Kethral said. His voice was thick with emotion. "On behalf of the High Council and all of my people, thank you. You came when we needed you most." Danny grinned, that same crooked smile that Kethral had learned to recognize as genuine affection. "Of course we came. That's what family does." Then Danny turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel. All frequencies. I want everyone to hear this." He cleared his throat and spoke into the void. "This is Lieutenant Commander Danny Reeves of the Earth Alliance vessel Starling, speaking to the Krovic Empire. You picked the wrong fight today. You thought you could break us. You thought you could break our friends. But here's the thing about humans." He looked around at his crew, at the damaged ships floating alongside his own, at the Velith fleet they had crossed the galaxy to save. "We don't give up. We don't abandon our people. And now you get to meet the rest of the family. Every ship you see here, that's just the beginning. Every human in the galaxy knows what you tried to do today. And we have long memories." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "So run back to your empire. Tell your leaders what happened here. And tell them this. The next time you think about attacking our friends, remember that you'll have to go through us first. And we're not afraid of you." He cut the transmission. Kethral watched from his flagship, his scales shifting to a color that had no name in the Velith language. It was a new color, one that his people would have to invent a word for. The color of hope. 3 years ago, he had believed humans were insane. He had warned his people to stay away from them, to avoid their chaos and unpredictability. Now he understood the truth. Humanity was not insane. They were simply loyal beyond all reason. They loved too quickly, trusted too easily, and fought too fiercely for anyone they considered their own. And somehow, impossibly, they had decided that the Velith were their own. Kethral looked out at the human ships, battered but unbroken, and felt something he had never felt before. He felt proud to call them friends, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that with humans as their allies, the Velith would never face the darkness alone again.